They said, "Stay in the lounge, Grandma. We'll come back for you after check-in." I nodded. Of course I did. That's what you do when your son gives you an instruction in that clipped, overly patient tone reserved for the elderly, the confused, and the inconvenient. I sat exactly where they told me, next to a dusty potted plant, wedged between a crying toddler and a flickering television tuned to a local weather broadcast. It was 8:20 a.m. I waited for over 7 hours. I'd packed 3 days earlier, laying out every outfit across the bed just like I used to for Evan's school trips. The tickets were to Coral Bay, a big family vacation, as my daughter-in-law Mara liked to call it. She'd insisted on matching t-shirts for the kids and me. Mine read Vacation Nana in loud coral letters. I didn't care for it, but I wore it anyway. She'd rolled her eyes at the airport when I pulled out my own snacks. Things began to feel off at the security line. Mara kept glancing at her watch. Evan, my son, was unusually quiet. The kids were glued to their phones. When the security agent asked about our seating, Mara just laughed and said, "Oh, we'll figure that out later." That was the last time anyone made eye contact with me. Once we cleared security, Mara turned to me with that same tight-lipped smile. "Mom, why don't you wait in the lounge? We'll go ahead and check in the bags, get the kids' boarding passes sorted, and then come back for you. Just relax. You've done enough." She patted my arm, not affectionately. It felt more like a dismissal. So I sat. I waited. I watched them fade into the crowd. After an hour, I stood up and walked near the windows. After 2, I asked the front desk to page Evan. No response. By the 4th hour, I stopped looking toward the entrance. People came and went. Flights were announced, boarded, and departed. A woman across from me had lunch, made 2 phone calls, then left. I stayed. At 4:30 p.m., I finally asked the clerk at the front desk for help. I gave Evan's full name. She typed, paused, and looked at me with careful eyes. "They checked into the 12:10 p.m. flight to Coral Bay, ma'am. That flight's already gone." I nodded. Then I asked her to say it again. She repeated it slowly. Her voice was gentle. I remember that. So, that was it. They'd boarded without me. Not by accident. Not a mistake. I knew my son. He had his faults, but careless wasn't one of them. I stepped into the restroom, locked a stall, and sat not to cry. I didn't have it in me. I just needed a place where no one would ask me if I was okay. When I came out, the airport was shifting into evening. The noise had softened. I walked to the departure screen and stood there, scanning the list. My hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't pound. I just looked, like a woman staring at a diner menu. And then I saw it. Raven Shore, 6:50 p.m. I can't tell you why I chose it. Maybe because I hadn't been there in decades. Maybe because it was where I learned to ride a bike as a girl. Maybe just because it was the opposite of Coral Bay. I walked to the ticket counter. "1 ticket to Raven Shore, please. For tonight." The young woman blinked. "Round trip?" "No. One way." I paid with my own card from an account Evan didn't know about, one I'd kept open since before he got married. I had just enough for the fare, a modest motel, and maybe a small start. I didn't need more than that. I powered off my phone. No missed calls. No voicemails. Of course not. The boarding process was quiet. No one asked why I was flying alone. No one looked twice at my shirt. I'd taken it off and tossed it in the trash before reaching the gate. On the plane, I watched the city's lights fade beneath me. 8 hours ago, I thought I was headed to paradise. Turns out, I was just being left behind. But now I was going somewhere real. Somewhere they couldn't follow. I landed in Raven Shore just after 9:40 p.m. The airport felt smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just gotten smaller, folded in from the weight of a day like no other. I walked through the terminal slowly, not because of my age, but because there was no longer a reason to rush. No one was waiting for me. And for once, that felt like a kind of freedom. Outside, the air was damp and brisk. Rain had passed through recently. It smelled of wet pavement and pine. I stood under the awning for a while, breathing. Then I found a bench and sat with my carry-on, the same brown leather bag Evan once called outdated. The corners were worn, the handles softened with time. Derek gave it to me for our 25th anniversary. He would have laughed at all of this, a knowing, warm laugh. The kind that said, well, sweetheart, what did you think was going to happen? I didn't expect this. Not really. But I can't say I was surprised. I opened my wallet. 2 cards, an ID, $64 in bills, and a folded piece of paper with an address I hadn't used in nearly half a century. 429 Meyer Lane. My first apartment after marrying Derek. I didn't know if it still existed. I didn't even know why I'd brought the address. But there it was. I called for a cab. The driver didn't talk. A small mercy. I gave the driver the address of a cheap motel I'd looked up before leaving Marlowe, just in case things fell apart. When we pulled into the lot, I paid without hesitation, took the key, and climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor. Room 212. The hallways smelled faintly of bleach and forgotten stories. Inside, the room was modest but tidy, 1 bed, 1 chair, a wall-mounted television. I splashed water on my face in the small sink and lay down fully clothed. The blanket was rough against my arms, but I didn't care. I slept without dreams. The next morning, I stood by the window and watched a woman in a pink robe walk a terrier along the cracked sidewalk. She looked close to my age, maybe a little sturdier in the shoulders. I made coffee using the small machine on the nightstand and settled into the stiff chair by the window, sipping slowly. No calls. No messages. I didn't check. For the first time in decades, I had no obligations. Nowhere to be. No one waiting. That was a strange thing to sit with. For years, my time had belonged to others. To Evan. To Derek. To the grandkids. To school committees I stopped attending over 20 years ago. But now it was mine again. At a little after 8 o'clock, I left the motel and walked into the neighborhood. My legs ached. My hip whispered complaints. But I kept moving. I stopped at a corner bakery and bought a cranberry scone. The woman behind the counter smiled when I handed her the exact amount in coins and bills. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked. "I used to be. A long time ago." "Well," she said, "welcome back." I didn't know if I was back. I wasn't even sure I belonged anywhere anymore. But her words felt warm, and that was enough. I asked her where people posted housing listings. She nodded toward a corkboard near the door. I scanned it. Offers for guitar lessons, yard work, used furniture. One handwritten note stood out. Quiet room for rent. Private shared kitchen. Safe home. Near bus line. No nonsense. No drama. $320 per month. Call M. Joy. The handwriting was blocky and unembellished, like someone who meant every word. I took a photo of the number. By midday, I'd walked a few more blocks and found a sun-warmed bench in a park near the river. I sat, took a breath, and made the call. A voice answered, low and wary. "Yeah, I'm calling about the room for rent." Long pause. Then, "How old are you?" 74. "Are you clean?" "Yes." "No boyfriends, right?" I let out a laugh. "Not in a very long time." "Come by at 5. 1678 East Beechwood. Bring cash for the first week." Then she hung up. I wrote the address on a napkin from my coat pocket. By 5 o'clock, I stood in front of a pale blue house with flaking paint, a sagging porch, and a windshield that clinked like silverware in a drawer. A woman opened the door, cigarette in one hand, a tabby cat curled around her feet. "You the old lady?" she asked. "I suppose I am." She stepped back. "Come on in, then. Let's see if we can stand each other." The inside of her home smelled like lavender and onions lived in, not messy. The kind of scent you only find in places where people actually cook. She led me down a narrow hallway stacked with newspapers and books, into a sitting room where the TV was muted. A crocheted blanket rested neatly on the sofa's arm. "Room's upstairs," she said, flicking ash into a saucer. I followed her up creaking steps, one hand gripping the banister. The upstairs hallway was dim, the wallpaper slightly peeling at the corners. She stopped at the last door. "This is it." It was small. A twin bed, a short dresser, a nightstand. Everything had a bit of wear, like it had survived things. But the window was large and sunlight poured in as if it had been waiting for someone. There was a small wooden desk with a chair, its paint faded but still holding. "This'll do," I said. $3.20 a month. I take weekly, 80 per week. Cash only. No checks, no cards, and I don't do pity stories. She looked me over for a moment. "You don't seem like the sob story type." "Not anymore," I said. She nodded like that was the right answer. Kitchen shared. Bathrooms down the hall. No unannounced guests. I like quiet. You cause problems, you're out. Clear. Clear as crystal. She handed me a key. "You can stay tonight if you've got the first week's rent." I took 4 20s from the envelope I'd tucked inside my inner coat lining. She didn't count the bills, just folded them and slipped them into a drawer. "You hungry?" I could eat. Joy made grilled cheese sandwiches and poured tomato soup from a saucepan. We ate at a small table beneath a yellowed ceiling fan. She didn't ask where I'd come from or why I was there. She only said, "I hate eating alone." And I understood that well enough. After dinner, I unpacked slowly in the little room. I had only brought 3 outfits, a toothbrush, my medication, and a dog-eared paperback I'd never finished. I placed everything into the dresser with care, folding each piece as if it mattered. Maybe it did. That night, I lay in the narrow bed and listened to a house not mine. The quiet tick of a wall clock. The creak of the floorboards. The faint murmur of Joyce, yes, that was her name, talking to the cat like an old friend. No calls. No texts. I still hadn't turned the phone back on. In the morning, before Joyce stirred, I made coffee. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. The kitchen felt more like home than the one I'd left behind, maybe because it didn't belong to people who only remembered me when something was expected of me. By the 3rd day, I started walking the neighborhood. About 3 blocks down, there was a corner cafe with a chalkboard sign leaning against the brick. "Help wanted, morning shift." "Apply inside." I paused. It had been more than a decade since I last worked, but early mornings and coffee pots were nothing new to me. Inside, the place was modest. 3 booths, a laminate counter, and a few bar stools with cracked red vinyl cushions. A young woman in an apron was wiping down the counter. "You hiring?" I asked. She looked up surprised. "You want to apply?" "Yes." She called into the back. A woman emerged stocky, hair in a loose bun. Her name tag read Heather. "You got experience?" she asked. "I've raised 3 kids and kept a household running for over 5 decades. I know how to make coffee, carry a tray, and I don't call in sick." She stared at me for a beat, then gave a small shrug. "Trial shift. Tomorrow, 6 to 11. If you make it through, we'll talk." That night, I ironed the only blouse I owned that still held a crease. I lay in bed early, staring at the ceiling. It had been less than a week since the airport. Less than a week since I was left behind like something unclaimed. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't waiting anymore. Now I was moving. Trying. Beginning. No one needed to know. Not yet. This new life, quiet, unannounced, unexpectedly mine, belonged to me. The cafes smelled like burnt toast and second chances. I arrived at 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes early. The front door was still locked. A man with thick glasses and an apron stained with flour opened it for me without a word. He grunted something that might have been morning and disappeared into the kitchen. Heather arrived 10 minutes later, holding a travel mug and keys on a rainbow lanyard. She unlocked the register and handed me an apron without ceremony. Hair tied back. No perfume. Refill cups before they're empty. If someone leaves less than $1 for a tip, that's on you, not them. I nodded. She looked at me a second longer, and her tone softened just slightly. "Nervous?" "No. I'm 74. I've buried a husband, raised a son who forgot my birthday 3 years in a row, and survived 6 colonoscopies. This is just coffee." Heather snorted. "Fair enough." By 7 a.m., the first wave of regulars had filed in contractors, early risers, nurses just off the night shift. I was slow but steady. I remembered orders, poured with a sure hand, smiled when it mattered. By 9, I found my rhythm. "Where'd they dig you up?" one of the men joked, a kind smile on his face. "Same place they find everything worth keeping," I said. "Back shelf under a blanket." He laughed and left a $5 tip. Heather saw it. She didn't say much, just handed me a clean towel after the breakfast rush and gave me a quiet nod. We wrapped up at 11. She poured herself another coffee and pointed to the stool beside her at the counter. Sit. I did. You did fine, she said. Just fine. You'll get better. She took a sip. You're hired. Minimum wage plus tips. No benefits, but it's steady. You can take the weekday mornings if you want them. That's more than enough. We sat for a moment in companionable silence. You got kids? She asked finally. I did. She glanced sideways, waiting. They're traveling, I said simply. She nodded. They always are. I walked back to the house with sore feet and a lightness I hadn't felt in years. Joyce was in the front yard, tugging at weeds in a faded t-shirt that read, "Don't talk to me before coffee." You get the job, she called out without looking up. I did. Told you, they need folks who show up. That night, we ate frozen pot pies and watched the news with the sound off. The cat, whose name I'd learned was Franklin, curled up between us like he'd claimed us both. You staying on? Joyce asked during a commercial. I don't know. You can. As long as you pay rent and don't hog the remote. I don't even like the remote. She smiled and handed me the last cookie. Later, I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand. I hadn't turned it on in days. I thought about checking. Thought about seeing if Evan had noticed. I didn't. Instead, I pulled out the old paperback I'd brought with me and started from page 1. The desk lamp cast a warm glow against the walls. Outside, rain tapped gently on the glass. Inside, I wasn't someone's leftover. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't an afterthought. I was a woman with a room, a job, a meal on her plate, and a chair of her own. It was enough. My first paycheck was small, $74.26 after taxes. Heather handed it to me in a slim envelope at the end of my Friday shift. Cash it or frame it, she said. I smiled and slipped it into my coat pocket. I wasn't used to money that was truly mine. For years, everything I had flowed outward, to Evan's family, to birthday gifts that never got a thank you, to medical bills for appointments no one had time to drive me to. But this was mine. And it was a start. But this time, it felt different. I'd earned it on my feet, apron snug, hands steady. I walked to the small credit union on Larch Avenue and cashed the check. The young teller behind the glass gave me a polite but uncertain look, like she wasn't sure I understood how things worked. 10s and 5s, please, I said. The rest in 1s. She hesitated, then handed me the bills. I folded them neatly and tucked them into the wallet I'd carried for decades. I walked out with my chin just a little higher. Across the street was a second-hand clothing store, the kind with too much crammed into too little space. A paper sign taped to the door read, Autumn Specials, 20% off coats. I stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled softly. Behind the counter, a girl who couldn't have been more than 19 looked up from a paperback and smiled. Looking for something specific? She asked. Yes, I said. Something that makes me feel like myself again. She didn't laugh. She just nodded and started flipping through the racks with me. I chose a navy wool coat with deep pockets and a faded herringbone pattern. It wasn't new, but it was sturdy and warm, the kind of coat someone might have owned for years and trusted every winter. I tried it on. It fit like it had been waiting for me. When I paid in cash, the girl wrapped it gently in tissue paper like it was something precious. You look sharp, she said. Thank you, I replied. I feel sharp. That night, I walked home wearing it. The air had cooled just enough to justify the layers. Joyce was on the porch, sipping wine from a chipped mug, Franklin curled at her feet. Where you been? She asked, not looking up. Bought a coat. She gave a low whistle. Look at you. Classy lady. Only on Fridays. We went inside and split a can of chili. The heater buzzed like it was clearing its throat. The floor creaked under Joyce's heavy slippers. It was noisy in the way old houses are comforting noises, the sound of a place that's been lived in long enough to earn its own rhythm. Later, in my room, I stood in front of the mirror. I turned left, then right, ran my hand down the sleeve of the coat. It wasn't just fabric. It was proof. I was still here, still standing. still able to choose something that was mine and mine alone. The phone remained off. I hadn't powered it on since the night I arrived. I didn't miss it. Sometimes I missed people, but not the kind who could leave you beside a fake ficus plant at a crowded terminal and never look back. Mornings were for work. By noon, I walked. Evenings, I read or listened to Joyce grumble about city officials and neighbors who didn't return borrowed tools. Every few days, I bought myself something small, a crossword book, a pair of thick socks, real loose-leaf tea to replace the sad little bag she kept in a rusted tin above the fridge. I was beginning to understand that there was a life here. Not a grand one, but a real one. And it belonged to me. By the second week, the soreness in my feet had dulled to something manageable. My hands remembered how to carry full trays without clattering. I could clear a 4-dop in under 2 minutes. Heather still didn't talk much, but one morning she slid a cinnamon roll toward me, wrapped in foil. "Too many," she muttered, not meeting my eyes. "Take one." That was her way of saying you belong. I slipped into a rhythm, weekday mornings on my feet, Saturdays for long walks through unfamiliar streets, Sundays for rest. Joyce didn't pry. She didn't ask where I went or why I was late. She just poured a glass of whatever boxed wine she'd found on sale and slid it across the table without comment. One evening, she came in with a stack of flyers and mail tucked under her arm. "Something for you," she said, tossing a small envelope onto the kitchen table. No return address. Just my name in that looping, unmistakable handwriting. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. "Grandma, where are you?" That was all I needed to see to know who it was from. Kaylin, my oldest grandchild. The only one who ever came to visit without being prompted. The same boy who once spent an entire afternoon building a lopsided birdhouse with me, painting it fire truck red and declaring, "This'll be the coolest spot in the whole backyard." The letter was short, just a few lines. "Dad and Marla are freaking out. They said you disappeared. No one's heard from you. I've been checking every day. I miss you. Please let me know you're okay." At the bottom, a phone number scribbled in uneven ink. A new one. His, I assumed. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of my nightstand. I didn't call. Not yet, but something in me softened. The next day, I was at the cafe register counting out change when Heather looked toward the front door. "You've got a visitor," she said. I turned. A man stood just inside, peering at the menu like it was written in a foreign language. He wore a gray windbreaker, neatly pressed slacks, and loafers polished to a quiet shine. He looked to be in his early 80s, clean-shaven, calm, and just slightly unsteady on his feet. When his eyes found mine, he smiled. "You the one who knows how to make real coffee?" I poured him a cup and slid it across the counter. "Cream and sugar?" "Just cream." 2 splashes. We didn't speak much. He drank slowly, read the newspaper someone had left behind, and left a tip that was kinder than necessary. He came back the next day, and the day after that. By Thursday, I learned his name was Raymond. Widower. 2 sons, one in Fairview, the other out west in El Dorado. We didn't talk about them much. Mostly, we talked about birds. He liked cardinals. I preferred finches. We both agreed that crows were cleverer than most people gave them credit for. On Friday, he brought a photo of his late wife. "Married 46 years, he said, tapping the edge of the frame. "She made better coffee than this, but you come close." I smiled and refilled his cup. That evening, I stood by the window in my little room, watching wind lift the leaves into small spirals on the sidewalk. I thought about Raymond's hands wrapped around that mug, about Kaylin's letter, about the navy wool coat hanging neatly on the back of my door. There were still gaps in this new life, quiet, aching gaps that crept in after the sun went down. But something was beginning to take shape. Not a return to what I'd lost. Something else. A slow turn toward something I hadn't known was waiting. It wasn't forgiveness. Not quite. It was freedom. The phone stayed off. I kept it tucked in the bottom drawer of my nightstand, wrapped in a clean handkerchief, like something sacred. Or something dangerous. I wasn't sure which. Joyce didn't ask. She never did. But one evening, as we sat at the kitchen table shelling peas into a bowl, she said quietly, You hiding or healing? I looked up from the calendar. Both. She nodded once, then went back to the peas. It had been 3 weeks. 3 weeks since the airport. Since the lounge chair with the broken armrest. Since the cheap plastic water bottle Evan had pressed into my hand before disappearing without a backward glance. No calls had come through. Not one attempt that I'd seen. Except from Kaylin. Now and then I opened his letter. The paper had grown soft at the creases. His handwriting reminded me of his mother, those long looping YS, the nervous slant to the right. Still, I didn't call. It wasn't about revenge. I wasn't being cruel. I just wasn't ready to reopen the door they'd so casually slammed shut. Silence is easy to fall into. It takes far longer to climb out. At the cafe, Heather didn't speak much, but she started saving me the crossword page from the daily paper. You look like the kind of person who finishes what they start, she said. Raymond came in every morning now, always at 9:10, always in that same gray windbreaker. He didn't flirt, not exactly, but he lingered, told a few more stories each day, asked the kind of questions that weren't intrusive, just curious. One morning, he looked up from his mug. How come a woman like you is working the breakfast shift in a place like this? I met his eyes over the rim of the coffee pot. Because someone left me in an airport lounge like a bag they didn't want to carry anymore. He blinked. I'm sorry. I'm not. I got on a better flight. That earned a soft chuckle. He reached for his cup, then paused. You ever think about calling them? Every day, I said. And every day I don't. He didn't push. Just nodded and drank his coffee. When I got home that afternoon, Joyce was in the backyard, spreading mulch around her scraggly rosebushes. Get any news? She asked, not turning. No, I said. Then, after a moment, because I needed to hear it out loud, I added, but I think they know I'm gone now. That night, I turned the phone on. It vibrated weakly, like a dying beetle. 32 missed calls. 18 voicemails. The oldest was from Marla, a breathless message from the day of the flight. Miriam, we thought you were in the bathroom. Please call us. We're boarding. A lie. The rest followed the same rhythm. Evan's voice, clipped and rigid. Where are you, Mom? Another. This isn't funny. Then finally, fine. Do what you want. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready. But I saved Kaylin's number. That much I could do. The next day, he called. I stared at the screen, watched his name blink, and for the first time answered. Grandma? His voice cracked, like he hadn't expected me to pick up. I'm here, darling. A pause. Then, you're okay. I'm better than okay. Where are you? Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I chose. He didn't plead. He didn't guilt me. He just said, I'm glad you're safe. I miss you. I miss you too. That was enough. No demands. No apologies. Just the voice of someone who still wanted me in their life, not because I baked cakes or offered free babysitting, but because I mattered. And that sound soft, sincere, real, meant more than any first-class seat on a tropical flight. By the 4th week, I had memorized the walk from the cafe to the corner pharmacy. I knew the scent of the lilac bush outside Joyce's neighbor's porch. I recognized the sound of Raymond's quiet knock on the window whenever I forgot his cream. Life wasn't exciting, but it had texture. It had shape. It had peace. And then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a letter arrived. Joyce slid it across the kitchen table without comment. The return address said Brookfield, my old town. The handwriting, familiar in the way a bruise is familiar. Something you recognize more by ache than sight. Evan. The envelope was thick. Inside were 6 tightly written pages of clean, sharp lines. No greeting. No warmth. Just, I can't believe you did this. He accused me of disappearing. Said I'd made a scene by absence, that I'd caused unnecessary stress for the family during their vacation. Marla cried every night, he wrote. The kids were confused. Do you think that was fair to them? Not a single word about the airport lounge. Not one mention of being asked to wait. No reference to the 8 hours I sat alone, or the flickering TV, or the toddler beside me crying into a sticky juice box. Just the performance of pain. The rewriting of facts. He ended the letter with, we're willing to talk, but only if you're ready to be reasonable. Reasonable. As if decades of babysitting, holiday cooking, emergency loans, and knowing when to be silent in my own life had been unreasonable. As if walking away from it all wasn't a choice, but a tantrum. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. Joyce didn't ask what it said. She just handed me a plate of toast and nodded toward the window. "Storm's coming," she said. It was. The next morning, Kaylin called again. "I heard Dad wrote to you." "He did. You gonna respond?" I was quiet for a moment, then said, "No, not yet. Maybe not at all." He didn't argue. "I get it." He told me he'd started working part-time at a used bookstore. Low pay, but he liked it. "Books don't yell at you," he said. We laughed, the kind of laugh that isn't about anything funny, just about relief. "You sound different," he said at the end of the call. "Different how?" "Lighter." That night, I took Evan's letter, struck a match, and fed it to the sink flame page by page. Joyce didn't flinch. "I'd have used the fire pit," she said. More satisfying. The next morning at the cafe, Heather caught me before my shift. "You want an extra slot this weekend?" Saturday brunch. Total madhouse. I said yes before I could think about it. Not because I needed the cash, though it helped, but because I liked how a full day felt in my bones. The ache in my feet was real and honest. Raymond came in later than usual. He'd started using a cane, nothing dramatic, just time asserting itself the way it always does. Knees, back, pride. "You burned the place down yet?" he asked, easing into his usual stool. "Not today," I replied, pouring his cup. He sipped, then paused. "You ever think about going back to Brookfield?" "To what?" "Any of it?" I wiped the counter with practiced hands. "No, not once." He nodded. "Then maybe you finally arrived." That night, Joyce surprised me. She knocked on my door, holding up a brightly colored flyer. "Community Center's hosting a potluck next week," she said. "You and I should go." I raised an eyebrow. "You go to potlucks?" "I go to free food and other people's gossip." "Don't read into it." I smiled. "I'll make lemon squares." "Good." I'll lie and say I made them. The days were shortening now. Dusk slid in earlier, curling around the old house like a heavy quilt. I made tea, sat by the window, and worked through a crossword. Franklin purred at my feet. My coat hung by the door, ready and warm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone waiting for life to restart. It had already started quietly, without permission. And it was mine. Saturday brunch at the cafe was chaos. By 8 a.m., the line was out the door. The coffee urn moaned in protest. The griddle hissed like it had a grudge. Heather moved like a woman in battle, snapping orders, flipping tickets, slapping utensils into syrup bins like she was building fortifications. "Eggs over hard." "Booth 4, she shouted. I didn't flinch. "Refill on 6? "Already done," I said. By 10, my legs were aching, but my head was clear. There's something strange and grounding in service. You stop thinking about yourself because you're thinking about everyone else. And in that, you find a kind of peace. Raymond didn't come in. Saturdays weren't his days. But as I wiped down the last corner booth, I caught a face at the window, and it stopped me cold. Younger than Raymond. Sharper around the jaw. But those eyes I knew. Marla. She stood outside for only a moment. Her coat was too expensive for the drizzle, her expression unreadable. She didn't come inside, just turned and walked away. I said nothing to Heather. Just finished my shift, counted my tips, and walked home slowly through the silver-soaked streets. The sidewalks glistened. My coat held the warmth of movement. My hands didn't shake. Back at the house, Joyce was gone. A note on the fridge read, "Library talk on bees." Back at 7. "Don't wait on dinner unless you're cooking." I made soup anyway. That night, I turned the phone back on. 3 new voicemails. The first from Marla. "We saw someone who looked like you. Please call us." Evan's worried. The second, Evan himself. "If this is about punishing us, it's gone too far. Enough is enough." The third, Kaylin. "Hi, Grandma. I think Mom's in town. She's been acting weird all day. If something happened, just be careful, okay?" I stared at the screen. The past has a way of sniffing you out just when your back is turned. That night, I slept light. Every groan in the pipes, every pop of the old floorboards seemed louder than usual. But nothing happened. Sunday passed quietly. On Monday, Raymond returned. He slid onto his stool, his cane resting against the counter. "Busy weekend?" he asked. "Eventful," I said. He stirred his coffee slowly. "Something bothering you?" "Yes," I said, but not enough to ruin this moment. He smiled, and we sat in silence, the kind only two people who've lived long enough can share without effort. After work, I sat on the porch with Joyce, both of us bundled in old sweaters, watching clouds drift low and dark across the sky. "I think they're looking for me," I said. I figured. She didn't ask what I planned to do. She didn't offer advice. She just passed me the mug of wine. "You still hiding or healing?" "Healing," I said. But hiding was nice while it lasted. She raised her mug. "To people who stop asking for permission." I tapped mine gently against hers. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to Evan. Not to Marla. To Kaylin. A real letter, pen on thick paper. I told him I was safe. That I'd found something new, that I wasn't angry, just finished waiting. I told him he was the only one who never made me feel like an obligation. I told him if he ever wanted to visit, he could, but only if he came alone. A few days later, another envelope arrived. Not from Evan or Marla this time. It was a manila folder, bulky, stiff, with a return address from a local news outlet back in Brookfield. One I recognized from the old neighborhood. Joyce handed it over with a raised eyebrow. "You got fans now?" I didn't answer. I opened it slowly at the kitchen counter. Inside was a folded printout of a newspaper article marked front page, community section. The headline read, "Missing Matriarch. Family speaks out on grandmother's disappearance." There was an old photo of me, mid-laugh, holding a pie dish, smile tight and closed-lipped. One of those images someone else had always loved more than I did. The article quoted Evan, "We're deeply worried. She vanished without a word. We just want her safe." Marla had her own quote, "She's vulnerable. We fear something happened. She's not the type to do something like this." I laughed, sharp and sudden, startling even myself. Not the type. Joyce leaned over my shoulder, scanning a few lines. "They really said vulnerable?" I nodded. "You should sue them for underestimating you. They'll have to get in line." There was something grotesque about it. The performance of concern. The theater of innocence. As if I'd wandered off confused, into traffic. As if I hadn't been quietly parked and forgotten before their plane even boarded. Heather saw the article, too. Someone had left it on the cafe counter during the morning rush. She slid it toward me without a word. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Never better." I kept the clipping. Not out of sentiment, but as proof. A reminder that people only start worrying when they can't use you anymore. That evening, I sat with Raymond in the booth by the window. He didn't mention the article. He just handed me a small brown paper bag. "I saw this and thought of you," he said. Inside was a tiny, hand-painted magnet shaped like a birdhouse. "It's silly," he added. I just remembered something he said. I smiled. "It's not silly. It's perfect." When I got home, I stuck it to the fridge with the same hand that once packed Evan's school lunches. The same hand that paid his overdue bills. The same hand that would never again reach out to be dismissed. I didn't tell Joyce about the magnet. Some things you keep for yourself. Instead, I told her I'd like to bake something for the potluck after all. "Lemon squares?" she asked. "No," I said. "Something better." The next morning, I pulled my old recipe box from the top shelf, the one I'd saved even after selling nearly everything else. Inside, still intact, was a yellowed index card. Derek's handwriting on the top line, "Miriam's sweet potato cake, good enough to make people behave I baked." The house filled with cinnamon and old memory. Joyce danced barefoot in thick socks across the kitchen floor. Franklin meowed like he'd been promised a slice. When we brought the cakes to the community center, a woman at the door sniffed the air. "What does that smell?" "It's divine." "New life," Joyce said, before I could reply. We both laughed. And I didn't feel small. I felt real. Rooted. Ready. Somewhere, probably back in Brookfield, Evan and Marla were sitting in their big house, wondering how they'd lost control of a woman they'd never really seen. Let them wonder. The community potluck was held in the basement of a church that smelled faintly of pine and old hymnals. Folding tables lined the walls, draped in plastic cloths and mismatched dishes. A woman with a gray braid and a clipboard moved through the room like a general in an apron, assigning corners and approving casseroles. Joyce and I arrived 10 minutes early. She carried the cakes. I held the napkins and utensils. It had been years since I walked into a room full of strangers and didn't care. "You go find a table," Joyce said. "I'll handle introductions." I drifted toward the coffee station, wrapping my hands around a warm paper cup. People trickled in slowly. Mostly women in thick cardigans and practical shoes. A few men hovered near the food table, eyeing things like they might vanish if they blinked. Someone tapped my shoulder. "Did you bring the sweet potato cake?" I turned. A woman with kind eyes and a sturdy frame smiled at me. "I did," I said. "God bless you," she replied. I thought Margie Platt was bringing her dump cake again. "Yours smells like someone still remembers what the holidays are supposed to taste like." I chuckled. I've been known to bake under pressure. The evening unfolded the way small gatherings always do, slow and loud, conversations layered over clinking forks, laughter popping like firecrackers from the folding tables. My cake vanished before the prayer even finished. Someone asked for the recipe. I told them it was classified. Halfway through the night, Joyce introduced me to a retired librarian named Marcia and a former bus driver named Terry. They invited us to their monthly trivia night. I told them I'd only go if the questions were from before 1992. Later, during dessert, Joyce leaned in and whispered, "You look smug." "I feel smug," I said. It had been years since I'd felt like I belonged to something that didn't require me to prove myself first. Back home, we kicked off our shoes and collapsed onto the couch. Franklin hopped up and settled into my lap, heavy and purring. Joyce turned to me. "You know they're going to show up, right?" I didn't answer. She said it again, softer this time. "Sooner or later." "I know." And I did. The letter. The article. Lisa's face outside the cafe. They were warning shots. And I was tired of living like I needed to duck. The next morning, a man in a dark suit stood across the street from the cafe. He waited until my shift ended, then stepped inside, removed his sunglasses, and approached the counter. "Are you Mrs. Miriam Hale?" I didn't like his tone. Too polite. Too rehearsed. "I am. My name is Colin Drexler. I represent Evan and Marla Hale. They've asked me to speak with you regarding your well-being and your assets." I blinked. My well-being is excellent. And my assets are none of their concern. He shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "They're very concerned, Mrs. Hale. They'd like to ensure you're in a safe environment. Possibly discuss next steps." I folded my apron neatly and placed it on the counter. "Tell Evan and Marla I'm not a misplaced item they forgot to claim. And there are no next steps unless I take them." He cleared his throat. "If you'd just consider, I've considered enough." I walked past him and out the door. He didn't follow. Outside, Raymond was waiting. He didn't have a coffee in hand this time. "You okay?" "Yes," I said, steady. "Because I won't let anyone convince me I'm not." That evening, I wrote one last letter. Not to Kaylin. To Marla. Just 3 lines. "I know what you did. I know what you didn't say. I'm not angry. I'm not coming back. Take care of your life now. I've finally started mine." The next morning, I mailed it with a stamp that had a small bird on it. A finch, the kind that sings even when it's cold. I expected silence. Maybe another letter from Evan, full of veiled accusations dressed up as concern. What I didn't expect was Marla in person. She arrived on a gray Thursday afternoon. Heather noticed her first, a woman in a sharply tailored coat, standing stiffly by the pastry case, pretending to study the chalkboard menu. Polished. Out of place. Waiting. I didn't go to her. I finished refilling the sugar caddies, wiped the counter, and let her stand there. When she finally stepped forward, her voice was low. "Miriam." I turned slowly. Marla. The cafe was nearly empty. Just Raymond in the corner booth and a young couple whispering over scones. "Can we talk?" "You're talking now." She winced. "Privately." I nodded toward the back. "Booths free." She slid into the seat like a woman bracing for weather she couldn't predict. I didn't know Evan was sending someone, she said. The lawyer, that wasn't my idea. No, I replied. But leaving me in an airport lounge? That was. Her eyes filled, maybe from guilt, maybe for show. I couldn't tell anymore. We panicked, she said. The flight was boarding. The kids were irritable. We thought you were behind us. I raised an eyebrow. 8 hours, Marla. You didn't call. Didn't ask the gate. Didn't check. She looked down at her perfectly manicured hands. Always perfect, always polished. I didn't think you'd leave. I didn't, I said quietly. You did. Silence stretched between us like a tightrope. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I don't want anything from you, she said. But Kalen, he's struggling. He misses you. Evan's furious, but Kalen, he's different. I took the envelope. Not because I wanted what was inside, but because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of refusing it outright. He doesn't need a messenger, I said. He knows how to call. Marla nodded. He might. She looked up, and for once, she didn't wear that mask of social grace. Just tiredness. Smallness. I wasn't trying to replace you, she said, voice soft. I just didn't want your shadow in every room. That was the closest thing to honesty I'd ever heard from her. I stood slowly. I'm not your shadow, Marla. I looked her in the eye. I'm my own person. And I finally remembered how to be one. She left without finishing her coffee. That night, Joyce and I sat on the porch wrapped in mismatched quilts. The air smelled of rain and distant wood smoke. She really said that? Joyce asked. I nodded. And nothing. She said her piece. I said mine. You going to see them? No, Joyce sipped her tea. What about the boy? Kalen. I smiled. He's different. I'll see him. But on my own time. Later, I opened the envelope Marla had left behind. Inside was a photo Kalen as a child, clutched tight on my hip in the backyard garden. We were laughing. My head thrown back, his cheeks full and red from the sun. Tucked behind the photo, a note in his handwriting. I remember. I always remembered. 5 words. But they were enough to carry the rest of the week. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen and watched the kettle boil, thinking about the word cut. Not in any cruel or sudden sense, but in the quiet, final way a string is snipped, a tether released. I'd spent so much of my life bound to people who never thought I'd walk away. But I had. And each day I didn't return, the knot loosened a little more. That afternoon, I walked to the bank. The same teller Mari was there. Purple nail polish chipped at the edges. She always looked a little surprised to be working indoors. I'd like to make a transfer, I said, sliding my ID across the counter. Of course, she said. From which account? I gave her the number of the old savings account I'd quietly reopened, the same one I used for groceries when Derek was alive. The one Evan never knew existed. And the recipient? Kalen Hale. I handed her the routing info he'd included in his note. It's not a big amount, I said. Just something small. For books, for groceries, for getting away if he ever needs to. Mari tapped at the keyboard and smiled softly. You're the first person I've seen in months send money with no strings attached. That's the point. It felt good, not like revenge. Sharper than that. It felt like closure. I stepped outside into crisp air, coat buttoned, collar high. The wind didn't bite, it nudged. Like a reminder. At home, Joyce was watching game shows. You look smug again, she said, eyes still on the screen. I made a decision. Anyone die? Not yet. She grinned. That night, I wrote one last letter. Not for the family. For the lawyer, Colin Drexler. I kept it short. To whom it may concern, there is no cause for further legal contact. I am of sound mind, in a safe environment, and under no duress. I have retained local legal counsel. Any future attempts to contact me under the guise of concern will be considered harassment. Sincerely, Miriam Hale. I signed it with a steady hand and dropped it off at the post office first thing the next morning. That was the final cut. I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. At the cafe, Heather handed me an extra shift without even asking. You're the only one who shows up early, she said. Everyone else wants applause just for clocking in. Raymond arrived just before noon. He looked tired, but steady. We sat by the window. Tea instead of coffee. You look lighter, he said. I wrote a letter, I replied. The last one. He didn't ask what it said. He just nodded. Sometimes it's the unsent ones that change everything, he said. Sometimes it's the ones you send, without needing a reply. That evening, I paused in the doorway before stepping inside. The house smelled of garlic and dryer sheets. Franklin padded up to me and headbutted my shin. Joyce glanced up from the stove. I made pasta, she said. Hope you're hungry. I was hungry. I was free. I was unafraid. Everything I hadn't been in years. Joyce turned 70 on a quiet Tuesday. She didn't want to party. People start singing and I start looking for exits, she'd said. But I baked a chocolate cake anyway. Left it on the kitchen table with 2 candles and a card that read, You're not old. You're vintage. She laughed when she saw it. I guess I can tolerate cake. That night, we sat on the porch again, slices balanced on paper plates, watching the moon rise over the rooftops. Wrapped in quilts. No music. No big declarations. It was the kind of celebration I used to think didn't count. But they do. Maybe more than the loud ones. You know, Joyce said, you've been here nearly 2 months. I know. You planning to stay? I looked out at the empty street, soft under the streetlight's glow. Yes. She nodded. Good. This house gets too quiet without someone yelling at the cat. We toasted with lukewarm tea. Franklin yawned and curled tighter between our feet. The next day, Heather handed me an envelope. What's this? Your name's on it. No return address. But the postmark's local. I opened it after my shift, sitting on the back step behind the cafe, the late afternoon sun slipping behind the buildings. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was large. Intentional. Grandma, I'm coming to Ravenshore. I want to see you. I'm not bringing anyone. I just want to talk. I'm staying at the Red Fern Motel on Maple, room 12. I'll be there Friday and Saturday. If you don't want to come, I'll understand. Kaylin, there was no guilt in the note. No pressure. No bargaining. Just a man, no longer a boy, reaching out with quiet hands. Friday morning arrived faster than expected. I dressed carefully. Not for him, for me. Navy coat. Clean blouse. Lipstick the color of dried cherries. I didn't tell Joyce where I was going. She didn't ask. The Red Fern Motel was modest. Clean, but tired. The kind of place built for passing through. I knocked once. He opened the door like he'd been waiting with his hand already on the knob. He was taller than I remembered. Scruff on his jaw. Shadows beneath his eyes. But the same gentleness in how he looked at me. Hi, Grandma. Hi, sweetheart. He didn't hug me right away. Just stepped aside and let me in. The room smelled faintly of takeout and hotel soap. The bed was made, but the desk was cluttered with books. He'd brought books. That said everything. We sat not too close. Like we knew we'd need a little space before the warmth returned. I didn't know if he'd come, he said. I didn't know either. He nodded. I read your letter. The one you didn't send. You left it in the drawer. Mom found it. Of course she did. I'm glad you didn't send it, he added. But I'm more glad you wrote it. We talked about small things. Then big ones. His part-time job. How I liked Ravenshore. How freedom tasted when no one was watching. I think about you a lot, he said. You were the only person who ever made me feel like I was enough. Just by sitting beside me. I reached for his hand. You always were enough, I said. You still are. We didn't cry, but we breathed deeper. He didn't ask if I was coming back. I didn't ask if he was staying. We knew better than that. Before I left, he handed me a small bundle wrapped in paper. Inside, a book of poetry. I underlined the ones that made me think of you, he said. That night, I read them one by one beneath the soft glow of my bedside lamp. One line stayed with me. There are women who rise not from fire, but from forgetting who told them they couldn't. I slept with the window cracked. The wind was soft against the pane, like a second chance. The next morning, I walked to the cafe as usual. Same coat, same path, but something was different. Not outside. Inside. Kaylin had gone back to the motel after breakfast. His train left around midday. We didn't say goodbye, just hugged long and quiet in the lobby while someone vacuumed in the next room. He held on the way boys do when they're not sure they're still allowed. Be good to yourself, I whispered. You too, he said. Finally, at the cafe, Heather handed me a new apron. Found this in a clearance bin, she said. Thought of you. It was deep green with white embroidered letters. Not your grandma's kitchen, I laughed, loud and full. Raymond looked up from his usual booth and raised his mug like a salute. After my shift, I walked home slowly. The sky was overcast, the air soft and clean. Franklin met me at the door, already grumpy that I'd missed his 2 p.m. stretch and yawl routine. Joyce was in the kitchen, stirring something fragrant on the stove. You look smug again, she said. New apron. I approve. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind you share with someone who knows you well enough not to fill the air. That night, I sat on the porch with a pen and a blank card. I wrote, Dear me, you waited so long for someone to save you. You forgot you were always the one holding the key. You didn't lose them. They let go. And you finally let go back. And look at the life that opened. Well done. Love, me. I taped it to the inside of my dresser drawer, just behind the old recipe cards, in case I ever need reminding. So, that's my story. I wasn't abandoned. I was released. And I didn't rebuild my life. I built something entirely new. If this found you at the right moment, don't wait for someone to hand you permission. You are the permission. You are the key. You are the step away from the lounge chair, from the flickering television, from the plastic water bottle and the broken promises. And when you do take that step, when you choose yourself, I'll be here. Sweetheart, don't forget to subscribe and leave me a little note in the comments. I love hearing from you.